Hey guys, I'm Angela and welcome back to Hobby Night. Today, I'm going to be painting up a thick boy from the Ogre Kingdoms.
They call us brutes, savages, but we don't care what they's calling us. No one can stop us from looting, eating, warring. What's theirs is ours for the taking. Do you have the guts to be a tyrant? Ripping them limb from limb.
In case you missed last week's news episode, we watched the Total War Warhammer 3 trailer for Ogre Kingdoms, and I am incredibly hyped that they are being added to the game, because they are the first faction that has really caught my attention that we've seen from the new game. Creative Assembly has done a great job with the Kislev and Cathay and even the demons, but they didn't really have that much personality to me. But these ogres, they do. They are ready to party, they have a feast going, they look fun. I can't wait to try them out in the game, but in the meantime, I remembered, well, I need to paint something for this week, right? What should I be painting? Well, I actually have the old box that came out, I think in like 2019 for Feast of Bones, which included the OCR Bone Reapers, but more importantly, also included the Ogre Kingdoms. So I went ahead and looked at those guys and was like, you know what? This is what we're gonna be painting this week. The trailer came out, it seems topical, plus I want to work on painting natural flesh tones because I've not really done that much with too many human colored flesh tones, and I thought this would be a great opportunity to practice. So without further ado, let's go ahead and pick out an ogre to paint. Hey, come here. Let me show you what we're looking at for our ogres. So I have to decide on what I'm going to actually build up, and I'm looking through this book, and the Tyrant, he's cool, but I've got 3 days to paint this up, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it in that time period. So we're going to skip him for now. Same thing with the banner guy. He's a little too complicated for 3 days. So really, I need to look at the troops. And I was looking through all of these guys, and I saw that there's this dude with a bear trap hand, which I just find absolutely hilarious. So, dun 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 dun, I have built him up. I have left one arm off to make it a little bit easier to paint. I do wish that I hadn't glued on the head, but I use Zap-A-Gap, so it's really on there. But I think it's gonna be fun. I think I'm gonna be able to do everything that I still want to without too much trouble. But in the future, I will probably leaving their heads off just so I can get to their chests a little bit easier. But we're gonna start. I've got them primed up using Wraithbone. Now we're gonna go ahead and start on the flesh tones. Now, I've painted a number of alien flesh tones because of my growing orc army, as well as some undead flesh tones because of my Death Guard and my obsession with vampires. However, I've not actually worked with that many natural skin tones. So for my ogre, I really had to look through my collection of paints to find what I was going to use for this, and I think I've found the perfect colors to help me achieve a nice, peachy, light flesh. Now, we're gonna start with a bit of Taldan Flesh, which is a Master Series paint by Reaper. And I didn't realize I had this in my collection until I was looking through it, and I absolutely love this paint. Not only is the peachy color tone of it perfect for what I'm wanting to go for, but it also is incredibly smooth and creamy straight out of the bottle, and I've never experienced that before, so Master Series paints, they're pretty nice. Now, once we've got this flesh tone over everything, basically all of his flesh that we need to cover, we're going to move on to a light wash. And to do this, we're going to use a bit of Guilliman's Flesh contrast paint, as well as some contrast medium mixed together. This is going to thin it down just enough so it basically functions as a glaze, and we're going to put this over everything we just painted, making sure that this color settles into all the folds on his flesh. I really want it to settle in there and darken them just enough. Once the contrast wash has had plenty of time to dry, we're going to move on to some highlights, starting with Taldan Flesh one more time. This is going to bring that rosy peachy color tone right back out, while having those shaded areas from our wash still be recessed and colored in, because that's just the way that the dry brush works. Once we are done with that dry brush, we're going to move on to a slightly lighter one using Tawny Flesh, which is another Master Series paint, but a little bit more pale and a little bit more yellow. I really like the combination of these two colors together. It gives me the exact Caucasian flesh tone that I was wanting. Now we can move on to working on some other portions of the model. His flesh is almost done. I think I'm just going to do one final wash, but I'm going to wait till the end because it's going to be an overall wash. But I'm really pleased with how this has turned out. It basically came out exactly how I wanted. I've got some nice highlights. I feel like I still got some nice shadows, but like I said, I'll enhance those in a bit. So what are we gonna do next? Well, next I wanna actually tackle the metallics, because for this guy, I actually decided I want to go with true metallics for this one. I'm not gonna go Baslicanum and do my classic contrast look with this. I think for him, I'm gonna go a little bit more true fantasy and actually have some I think I'm gonna use honestly, Leadbelcher and then a combination of maybe Cryptek armor or something like that. I want maybe something more brassy. I haven't fully decided on the metallics yet, but I'm going to tackle those next, and then that way I can do a final cleanup and then actually get to the cloths and leathers, which will all be contrast paint. So let's get to it. After looking over the miniature one more time, I decided that before I actually move on to the metallics, I need to take care of his stone weapons. So for that, I'm going to pull out a bit of Skavenblight Dinge, which is a color I don't actually know if I've used on the channel before, but it's a really nice dark gray. We're gonna apply this to his stone axe, as well as both of the stone knives that he has attached to his belly plate. Once that is on there, and it does take 2 coats to get this color thoroughly on, we're going to move on to 2 additional dry brushes to help bring out some highlights. This might be very similar to what we did on the skin just a minute ago. But this time we're going to be using Dawnstone to help bring out a light, sort of pale gray color tone. And then once that's done, we're going to move on to a lighter color using Longbeard's Gray to bring out an even brighter highlight. I especially love the way this works on the stone knife. I think the textures I ended up getting on the knife really make it look like genuine stone. I'm very pleased with it. Now that the stone is done, we can actually move on to the metallics, starting with a bit of Leadbelchers. We're going to use this on the spikes that are in the axe head itself, which I imagine are especially painful as he's knocking it into your face, which will then get planted into his bear claw hand, which is also going to be painted up in Leadbelchers. Additionally, we're going to paint the inner portion of his belly plate using this color, as well as touching the studs on his eye patch that are actually pinning them to his face. Once that's done, we're going to move on to some golds, because if you looked at the trailer, they were wearing a lot of iron and a lot of sort of brassy gold color tones. And for that, I decided to pull out Balthasar's gold. This is a deep, rich color, and I'm going to put it on the belly plate, really making the face pop out. But I wanted to have this color in a few other places as well, so I decided to put it on the embellishments that he has on the wraps on his arms. I think this makes it a little bit more decorative, makes him feel a bit fancy, and I think it's looking great. But then you might notice I have the teeth left on the belly plate, plus there's a couple of studs on those bracelets that I also want to accent. For that, I decided to pull out Canoptek alloy, because originally I was thinking maybe I'd make the teeth bone, but then I decided I really just want the belly plate to be entirely metal, and I figured the Canoptek alloy being very light but still very warm color toned would complement with the colors I'd already used while still looking like bony white teeth, and it works perfectly. It's the next day, and I finished the metallics, and I just wrapped up doing the cleanup, and I'm really pleased with how well he cleaned up. I'm super pleased with how both the metallics and his flesh tones have turned out. Now it's time to actually work on the leathers and all the organics, and I have some ideas because I was watching the trailer, and since this whole paint scheme was inspired by that, I want to pull some of the colors from the trailer into this model. I've already done that a little bit with the metallics that I chose because there was a lot of deep irons and there was some brassy golds in there and everything. So I think for the pants, I'm going to go with a red. For the leathers, I'm going to stick with some sort of classic leather tones, Snakebite and that kind of thing. But I want to actually have a little bit of a blue tint in there too. So for his hair on his beard, I'm going to make him an older man. I'm going to give him a gray beard and use Apothacary white because they'll have a bit of blue. If you look in the trailer, some of their pants have a little bit of a blue-white tone to them. So that'll incorporate that color too. So I'm really excited for this. Let's get to finishing this model up. Now, if you're a fan of the channel, you might know that I really like the Flesh Terror Red's color tone from Contrast Paint. And when I saw that the ogres in the trailer had some really bright red sashes around their waists, I was like, yes, cool, I can use flesh tearers on this model. And that's exactly what I'm going to do for his pants, as well as the eyes on the face on his belly plate. I think it just makes them pop, they look a little bit like rubies, and it really makes them stand out. Once the red is done, we're going to move on to a smorgasbord of reds, or not reds actually, browns. I don't know what I'm thinking about. I'm really thinking about flesh tearers still. But no, we're gonna be painting with a bunch of browns next because he's an ogre. He has huge collection of meals that he can pull from. There's lots of animal hides that he's probably skinning and taking off the meats that he's eating. And I figured he's probably gonna repurpose those into his outfit. So we're gonna start with a bit of snakebite leather on his boots as well as on his belt. Once those are painted up, we're going to move on to Fyreslayer's flesh, which is a color that I've not used very regularly on the channel, but I really, really like it. It's got a little bit of a pinkish orange color tone, and I think it complements against the Caucasian flesh that I put on him very well. So we're gonna put this on the wrap on his wrist, as well as on all of the wrap around his axe. I think this really works with the stone coloring too, and it just, I really, really like this one. But next, we're going to move on to Darkoath flesh, which is my favorite of all of the flesh tones for contrast paint. We're gonna put this on his eye patch and any additional wraps that haven't already been touched up with some paint. Then finally, you might have noticed those strings that are holding his pants together. Well, I don't want to just leave them red matching the flesh tearer's color tone that I actually painted for his pants. So instead, I'm going to pull out some Gore-grunta fur, which is a nice, really rich, deep sort of brown orange color tone, and I'm going to apply this directly over top the flesh tearers. This makes a really deep, deep orange color, and I think it complements very well, makes those strings stand out, but doesn't draw too much attention to his very red butt. Hello, Imperial Citizen. This is your regular reminder to subscribe to the channel and hit the Emperor's bell for notifications. And if you're feeling particularly devout, you can join my Patreon where you'll get exclusive unboxings, behind the scenes content, and more. Now, let's go ahead and get back to the video. I'm down to the details, so let's talk about how I'm going to take this model to the next level. I'm going to start with one final brown tone. I know, I've just had a bunch of brown paints that I've been using, but I need one more, and that's Wyldwood for the handle of the axe, as well as the sheath that I left unpainted. Originally, I was going to make that black, decided that was a bad idea, and decided to make it Wyldwood instead because it fit the more naturalistic color scheme that I was going with the model. Once that's done, we're going to move on to those very prominent nipples you may have noticed that he has, because they're sticking out really far, and I want to paint them up and actually make them stand out a bit more. So for that, I'm going to take some contrast medium to thin down some Volupus pink and glaze this on to not only his nipples, but as well as his lips, because I really feel like this is going to add an extra level of realism to the piece, and it does. I love the way that this looks. I'm totally going to be doing this on more of my models going forward, if they happen to have lips and nipples for me to paint. Once that's finished, we're gonna move on to Apothacary White, which I'm applying to just his beard. Then in the trailer, there was a lot of blue tones in a lot of their outfits and everything. And while I didn't want to go with specific blue clothes for my ogre, I still wanted to have a little bit of that color in the piece, and Apothacary White was the perfect way to do this. Once I let that thoroughly dry, we're going to move on to some skeleton horde, which I'm going to be applying, of course, to the skulls that he has decorating that glorious beard, which, by the way, has totally made him look like Santa with his red pants, and I love that. It is the season after all. But we're also going to put the skeleton horde color on his teeth, as well as his fingernails. Now, this is not something that I normally do, and I'm really glad that I did, because again, it adds such a level of realism and really amps up this piece. But there's one final thing that we need to do to really bring this piece to the next level, and that is by dotting his eye with a little bit of Abaddon black and a very tiny brush. This is not something that I normally am very comfortable with and intend to avoid, but because this ogre had a really nice big bulging eye, I felt very confident that I'd be able to get an accurate dot and make it look like he actually has a pupil, which I was, and I'm super pleased with it. Look at that face. Look at that dotted eye. I'm so proud of myself. I mean, it helps that he has this giant bulging sort of eye, but I am incredibly pleased with this miniature. So I don't have a whole lot left that I actually need to do. I need to get this arm attached to his body before we do a couple of washes. I'm gonna do one spot wash and then one overall wash just to help bring a few things out, which we'll get to here in a second. And then after that, I need to get him mounted to his base and get something on the base to make it more interesting. And I think that's where I'm gonna play with a little bit more color. I haven't fully decided. We'll go into more detail on that in a little bit. But for now, let's go ahead and get to the washes and really get this guy finished up. I'm down to just 3 colors to finish off this model, and that is some selective washes. We're gonna start with a Baslicanum gray thinned down wash over top all of the metallics that we put down earlier. This is going to help knock back the excessive shine that some of those metallics have while adding a little bit of grittiness and age to the piece, which I absolutely love because he's, wearing this armor around. It shouldn't look pristine and super shiny. I want it to have a little bit of dinge to it, and Baslicanum knocks back those colors super well. Once that's done, we're gonna move on to Nuln Oil, which I'm only going to be applying to his pants. Now, I will say that if you wanted to, you could use Baslicanum here instead of Nuln Oil, but I found that Baslicanum in particular, when put over top other contrast paints, gets a little bit of a gritty texture, and for his pants, I wasn't explicitly wanting that. It does work really well in some instances, but not here. So we're gonna put the Nuln Oil instead. Then the final color that I want to use is Reikland's Flesh Shade, and this does wonders to smooth out his skin, really deepen those shadows a bit more, plus it helps blend in all of those extra brown tones that I've added to the piece with all the leather color tones that we put down. I adore what this has done to the model. He's looking fantastic, but now we need to talk about his base. Base, 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 base. You guys, this is the best face that I've ever painted up. You'll get to see that in more detail here in a second, because we need to talk about the base and what we're going to mount him onto. So I had an idea, because he's already leaning into a little bit of a holiday color scheme, what with those red pants and the white beard, it's looking a little Santa maybe. I figured let's lean into that a little bit. So I want to start by applying a layer of Sterling Mud to my base, letting that thoroughly dry, and then we're gonna go over it with a single dry brush of Hobgrot's hide. Once that's done, I'm going to use a spray bottle that contains a mixture of PVA glue and water that I got out of the Jazz's art box that we bought last year and actually haven't used yet. And the reason I'm gonna be using it today is because this is going to help me put on some flock, which I think I've done like once on one of my models. So I'm really excited for this. We're gonna get some flock down on this base, and then we're going to tuft it up, adding a lot more greenery to it. Because like I said, I wanna lean a little bit into the holiday vibe, but if you want a lore reason, I figure he's made it to say Altdorf, the land of man. He's stomping through the woods and marsh there and everything, seeing all this greenery. And I think it's gonna pop really well. So let's go ahead and get him based. Look at how cool he turned out. I am so incredibly pleased with how I actually accomplished this miniature. Everything that turned out about him, the flesh came out great, the pants turned out great, the metallics all turned out great. Frankly, I feel like I genuinely leveled up again with this model, and I think it's entirely due to the fact that I focused on some of the details that I otherwise have in the past skipped on my models. In particular, I actually painted up his nipples, I painted up his lips, and I also got his fingernails, which are normally things that I don't actually take care of when I'm painting a model. And honestly, it helps. It just adds a certain level of like extra life to him. It just, realism, there's an extra level of realism to the model, which I'm really enjoying. And this guy, just with all of his fun, like curved flesh and everything, all the colors that I got to use, all of the tufts that I ended up putting on the base, I just loved everything about it. I'm hoping to paint up some more of the ogres, practicing other flesh tones as well, because now that I've gotten the Caucasian flesh tone down, I want to try a variety of other ranges. I do think I'll need to pick up some new paints for that though, because I don't know how many of like darker flesh tones that I have, but I'm excited to try them. You'll probably see them on my Instagram. I really enjoyed this. I hope you guys did as well, and I'm looking forward to when Total War Warhammer 3 comes out, because I am definitely going to be playing the Ogre Kingdoms and trying out their mechanics. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. If you're interested in seeing that, let me know down in the comments and tell me what you thought of my Ogre, because I'm pretty proud of him. In the meantime, I want to go ahead and give a grand thank you to my patrons for supporting us and helping us make content like this. You guys are awesome, and we wouldn't be able to do this without you. If you'd like like to join them, you can find a link in the description below. In the meantime, I have been Angela, you have been watching Hobby Night, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!